Evening. Live from Minneapolis. This is Bright Lights. I'm your host, Lacey Johnson. We are your weekly excursion into the world of achievement, where we bring you guests who are our bright lights to share with you their road or journey to success, and also share uh, a little that light on our audience. And basically, we are here, and we know a lot of, especially our young people, they hear so many negative things about all the obstacles in life and all the issues they have to overcome and how unfair everything is. And, I'm just upfront. I think you can be anything you want to be with a little hard work, discipline, success, education, and those type of things. In fact, one of my favorite sayings is that the only place where success comes before work is in the dictionary. And so I'm here to let you know whatever you want to be, we believe you can be it. Don't listen to a lot of the naysayers and who paint a lot of negativity around you and your life and your future. So if you have any doubt about that, listen and let us know. Uh, One of the things that I've been talking about is getting to the root problems of a lot of issues that's been facing our communities, our cities, our states, our country, and especially in disadvantaged communities. And I have been upfront from the beginning that a lot of these issues that's plaguing these communities, in the short term, we can only hope to contain them. In the long term, what we have to do is get to the bottom of these issues. And I've been basically spelling out what I think it would take to get to the bottom of these issues. And as always, I say to people, if you got a better idea, let's go with yours. But my idea is first and foremost, education, business and economic development. And basically, the way I put it, put money in people's pockets. Uh, and wealth creation, where you have generational wealth, where you build up a net worth, personal net worth that you can pass on to your children, and you set an example for them and kind of break this cycle of poverty and violence and things like that. Uh, so, education, economic development, also family. We have to rebuild the families. I don't see any other way as far as long term solutions. If anyone got better ideas, once again, like I say, let's go with that. And then again, I'm just a strong believer in the importance of faith. And I was talking to a young man today. Look, when I say faith, it's just the discipline that it brings and the answers that it provides to a lot of situations that you come across in life. And really, he was telling me about his life, and it was very interesting. And I suggested that he start going back to church and things like that. So those are the type of things that I've been advocating. And along that line, and it's dealing with wealth creation, one of the better ways to help increase net worth and provide generation wealth is through real estate purchasing and real estate development and things like that. And towards that end, I'm happy to have with us our guest tonight, who's made a career in real estate and other things related to that, uh, Mr. Andy Noble. Uh, Good evening, Andy.
How you doing, Lacey? Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you here. And I think we met a couple of times at different events, networking events, and so good to have you here. And I know some of the things that you've been trying to do, and we'll talk about that shortly. But before we get started, and well, first of all, how are you doing, and how's life been treating you?
Well, it's been a wonderful time. Honored to be on your show, and just love what you're talking about, Lacey, and with the people that you're talking about it with. We need more of you. We need more people in the private sector and the public sector working together for solutions. And We do a little bit of that in my current role with Keller Williams as a team leader and a CEO of Market Center. We're just really blessed to have the opportunities that are coming about right now in the real estate industry here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they're having a record year right now.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little while again. Before we go there, just tell us a little bit about yourself and there was places like where you're from, a little bit about your family background, childhood influences, those type of things that would be a predictor, let's say, where you are today. So just give us a little biographical sketch of
Sure.
Andy Noble.
Well, Lacey, I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana. I moved up to the Twin Cities 13 years ago, and have been in the frozen cold up here. I know you come up from Mississippi in the South, so you were used to even more warmer weather than I am. I always say I moved to Minnesota for the weather, yeah, I grew up in Indianapolis, born and raised. Went to Indiana University. Spent most of my adult years in Indianapolis, built up a group of companies with about 38 employees, managing and owning several thousand units of multifamily and single family homes, and really spent about 25 years in that business, doing a lot of different real estate related things. I just have really, I took a little bit of a hiatus out of real estate in 07, 08 when the market really turned down and the banks almost failed, and left the industry for about 7 years after 25 years into it. And I'm 4 years back into it now and just loving it with my current company. So I'm kind of taking a culmination of about 25 years of work in the real estate property management, development, financing, construction, brokerage business, all those different facets, and really putting that to use now in my current role, where I manage and oversee about 200 real estate agents and a team of staff of about 10 people. So it's been a lot of fun. We've been very busy.
Well, it sounds like it. I have to interject something personally about Indianapolis. I have quite a few fond memories of Indianapolis. Well, first of all, my fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, was founded at Indiana University in 1911, and that's one of my connections there. Secondly, we call it Naptown, Circle City, I think it is, and one of the most memorable nights of my life. They have the Circle City Classic down there where they bring in the two HBCUs football team, and I attended one. And this was a long time ago, and I forgot the stadium that was there, but I just remember the moon was out, and they had these long stairs leading up to the stadium. And if you're familiar with it, it turns into like a HBCU love fest that weekend.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that. So I have a lot of fond memories of Indianapolis. So let's talk a little bit about your education. And I know you attended Indiana University, got a few degrees there. So why don't you tell us about that and what made you choose those type of majors of all the various degrees that you have?
Well, obviously I started out at Indiana University for my undergraduate, and actually I was a member of a fraternity there, Great Greek system. And I know your fraternity, and that's a wonderful, wonderful chapter there. I studied political science, thought I wanted to go into the business program at the Kelley School of Business, which is one of the top business schools. And I really was heading down that path, and then kind of made an abrupt shift into political science. And really realized at that age, Lacey, I like you had kind of a propensity and an interest in not necessarily public office at the time serving, but in not only our political process, but also how important it is, if you're going to be successful in business, to be very engaged in our political system, because everything coming out of our political system and out of Washington and our state capitals is greatly impacting our lives personally and professionally. And so, I had a great mentor, Dr. Dick Fredland, who was at Indiana at the time, was my advisor, and really was just an incredible individual. And he was actually an expert in written a number of books in African studies, on several countries in Africa, and had gone over there and spent quite a bit of time. And so, anyway, he was definitely an early influence on me, and really got into more of a liberal arts education path, doing a lot of writing, a lot of debating and discussion. And I wouldn't trade it, looking back on it, for anything. I mean, as much as I think getting a business degree would have been a great thing, I really did a pivot early on and said, my parents are both very educated people. My dad has a PhD in English, and my mom's a master's in library science. They're both accomplished book authors. So I kind of came from that background, and I really learned to value writing, speaking, and a lot of the skills that we don't put enough value on, and we're not teaching young people enough today. That I think even are valuable in business, and I think are very essential to leadership. Don't you think?
Yes, I agree with you. So you mentioned Africa, and I know in doing a little research on you that you have extensive business experience in other countries. Why don't you just give us a quick list of all these different countries that you have uh, done business in and went over and improved these countries and uh, got
Well,
the
that would be very generous if I could say that I've improved any countries in the world, but I certainly had some wonderful experiences in Asia, and a little in the Middle East. It was just probably more in Asia than anything. I've been over to Asia quite a bit, almost geez, I don't know, 30 times. I mean, used to go over there pretty regularly, and I kind of stumbled into that opportunity. A good friend of mine took me over there on the first trip, who is actually coming out with an amazing company out of Indianapolis right now called Vocare. And Steve is a good friend of mine, and was an engineer making products. And we were trying to create some products for the apartment industry, which is what I was in, multifamily. And we went over there and got way down the road on a few things, and it was really fun and exciting. And there were just learned a lot of stuff in the process of manufacturing and shipping back to the United States. So that's kind of how we got involved over there, and really made some great connections and contacts, and started really moving in a path of another group of small companies that were going to be making products in Asia, particularly in China, and then shipping that back here. And really, the one thing that we kind of stepped on, that regulation, the regulational environment, is shipping
Mhm.
products back into the U.S. with certain chemicals embedded in them, plastics and such, added tariffs to the products, which really ate up a lot of our margins that were pretty incredible, what we were able to gap, in making these in China and shipping them back, such as vinyl replacement windows, or carpeting, which we were really kind of honing in on several lines for these types of products. And it was a fascinating experience to go through, and also, to get involved in. But it also taught me a lot about how regulatory and environment trade is, firsthand.
Mhm.
I mean, we learned firsthand. We learned about just-in-time manufacturing, and how to make products in Asia, ship them to Mexico for assembly, and then truck them up here every 3 days, and what's considered just-in-time manufacturing. So we were looking at models like that, and it was just a fascinating experience. And you got to remember, that was the early 2000s. We were doing
Okay.
that back in the early 2000s. So a lot of great trips over there, a lot of great connections. It just those travels also kind of led to some new opportunities that I have started here within my market center for my Keller Williams agency, with the 200 agents we have, called the Multicultural Agents Council. And a lot of my experiences overseas doing business as an American in those countries was my inspiration for starting that group here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which we can talk about a little bit later here. But I think that was very much my experiences in traveling overseas, was a lot of the inspiration for how I created that organization and the success that we've had with it.
Okay, so Andy, you mentioned doing some manufacturing and things over in China and shipping the products back here, and how when you start dealing with the regulation and tariffs and things, it cuts into your profit. Where I'm going with this, Andy, and I know you probably run the numbers, But there are a lot of communities over here where we could put up factories and things like that, and have I'm assuming a competitive wage of what's when you add on the tariffs and things like that, be competitive in the labor market with China. Am I uh, misunderstanding, overestimating what it would take to move some of those jobs back in some of the disadvantaged communities here and pay them a decent wage? And would it be still competitive with
Well,
manufacturing in China? And I think you understand the gist of what I'm asking
oh
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
No, I think that's a great question, Lacey. And the answer is absolutely. I mean, you got to remember, this is probably 18, 20 years ago.
right.
Um, there was really a fundamental thing that was the attraction to making products in China that was happening back then, and that was the Chinese Communist government was offering a tax credit to manufacturers in China, many of which are actually owned by the Communist Party of China, the government.
Yeah, I know
Uh,
about that.
and they owned about 2,000 to 3,000 manufacturers that are, to this day, still some of them are state-owned enterprises. And what they did was, to be competitive and to outflank American companies or American communities from being able to make these products, they would literally provide them with a 12 to 14% tax credit over and above when they're, so in other words, when they're bidding, they can make up 12 to 14% of their cost, and just take it right off the top to be, if they're competing with American companies or American communities to make these products. And that was why we lost so much of our manufacturing to China particularly in the early 2000s. And then they did away with that. And I'm not sure what year in the early 2000s the Chinese government actually stopped doing that, and it became a little more level playing field. But no, I totally would agree with you, Lacey. Today, there are still cost advantages or competitive advantages to making certain components or products in China or in Asia. Some of that's moved out of China now into emerging countries like Vietnam, Korea. You're seeing Taiwan. You're seeing more of that happening. But no, I would agree with you. The playing field has gotten a lot more level, and I think when you add in all the added time that it takes to make and ship those products here, a lot of people companies are now looking at this going, even if we're saving a little bit, we're not saving enough to make it worth the while to make this half a world away and ship it on a boat to Long Beach from
Right,
Shanghai that takes 26 days in a container ship. So,
right.
I think there definitely has been a lot of change in this, and I would agree with you. We need to be aggressive. And I think, honestly, I mean, as much as I hate to make things political, I think Donald Trump was doing some things that were very necessary for American business to stand up to the Chinese and say, we can be competitive. We can match your prices too without government intervention, which is not a free market economy. And that's the
Hmm.
whole reason the Chinese have been cheating, is they're basically they're financing their businesses with government money, which is not a free market economy, and it's protectionism. And they're financing that gap to make sure they can beat us out and eliminate our jobs and eliminate our manufacturing. And it's had a devastating impact on the United States and many communities in this country. And we got to go back and fix this. And I think Trump was on a very, like him or not, he was on a good path to leveling that playing field. And I think the Chinese were scared about it and they didn't like it.
And so when you look at the playing field nowadays, do you foresee a future where American businesses will start looking within this country for some of those manufacturing capabilities and giving some of these, let's say, disadvantaged communities an opportunity to compete with China uh, in the production of a lot of these goods and equipments?
Oh, there's no doubt. And I know quite a few people that are directly tied into this effort here in the United States on an economic development level, which is one of your pillars that you strongly believe in, is business and economic opportunity, business development opportunity. Um, no, there's no doubt. And again, I think Trump may not have been the first or only person to have pushed this agenda, but I think he really was pushing for a reemergence of manufacturing. Look, there's a lot of people in this country that have given up on manufacturing. They don't think
Hmm.
manufacturing is even a worthy pursuit, any different than they think our oil and gas industry is worthwhile. And we got to stop and realize that you can't switch these things on and off generationally. There's generations of investment and people involved in this. And if you're going to transition to whole new economies to replace other elements of the old economy, like manufacturing or oil and gas, you cannot do this in one administration or over a couple of years. And we've seen the effects that's had on the Keystone Pipeline and how many jobs have been lost from that, as well as right now the Line 3 in northern Minnesota is being challenged by environmentalists even after it's been approved. So,
Right.
We've got to be careful how we do this stuff. There's real implications to not only generations of people, but also many jobs, people's lives and well-beings. And I saw this, with the situation happening in China and in Asia in the early 2000s was we were massively shutting down factories. People don't realize it. We have literally tens of thousands of shuttered industrial facilities and manufacturing facilities in this country today still that have gone, that are available to do something or repurpose in many communities. And the question is, what do you do with those? What is the opportunity or the highest and best opportunity? Right?
Yeah. And one more subject on China, and then we will segue into your current profession, what you're doing in real estate. I have been talking to American business people who've been traveling to China, and I understand that it's one of the most racist countries there is. In fact, I have personal stories of Black businessmen being left out, saying they can't come into meetings. Have do you know anything about that? And is that true, or is that just some type of rumor that I'm hearing here?
Well, I think we all could definitely come together and agree that overgeneralizations about entire populations of people is probably not a good thing to say. I mean, are all Chinese or are all Asians racist? Of course not at
Of
all.
course, yeah, yep.
But I do think what you're touching on, and I will say, it's interesting from my lens and traveling that much overseas, how much I see people claiming this as a racist country. And not really, the people that are claiming that, Lacey, have not traveled. They've not gone over to Asia 30 times, or they haven't gone to the Middle East, or they haven't gone to other countries of the world. Many of them haven't traveled at all, if you really get down to it and ask them, as they haven't even traveled outside the U.S. So their only lens of comparison is what they see and they think or they're told is going on in this country. And I would say, to your point, and I think it's a valid one, we don't know if we think this is the most racist country in the world, or that this is the only country that racism is being promulgated. Get on a plane and travel around the world, and you might be surprised how well received certain ethnicities in this country and throughout the world are addressed in other countries. And I'll just leave it at that. But yes, the answer is, I think that we're all looking at this lens and pointing fingers in our own country at how impure and racist this country is. And I'd like to see some of these people get on a plane and travel halfway across the world like I have, as many times as I have. And you tell me what you think as far as is racism existent or happening in areas like Asia, the Middle East, Europe, Russia, all these different countries. The truth is, it is. That sometimes in a larger degree.
Okay, and that's a good point, because we do tend to overgeneralize on that, and I have done a little traveling myself, and people tend to welcome me with open arms, and I just wanted to get that clarification out there. So let's talk a little about your real estate. Well, currently, as I understand it, homes are selling like hotcakes, so to speak. Is that true, and how do you explain that?
Well,
So,
again, the great thing about having me on for a conversation around some of these topics is I'm pretty well traveled and have been around this industry for 31 years, the real estate industry. I can tell you that I've been through 3 recessions, and I wouldn't even put 07, 08 into the category of a recession. I'd call it a damn near collapse of the financial system. That's probably more severe than a recession. But I will tell you, in my 31 years, I've not seen the housing market this strong and this sustainable. We traditionally go through 7-year cycles, and those are not absolute, but if you look back in history over the last 80 to 100 years, the real estate economy, as a key component of our national economy, is really ebbed and flowed, Lacey, on a 7-year cycle. And again, that could be one cycle, it's 8 years, 8.5, another it's 6.5, another it's 7.5. They're generally averaged out to be about 7-year cycles. We're 12 years plus into the current cycle. And what that tells us is we're due for a correction. We are definitely overdue. Let's use the word overdue for a correction in the housing market. We don't know when it's going to happen. It's really bizarre because I'll give you a little insight. The 10-year Treasury bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds, are really the index for interest rates. So if you want to know where interest rates are heading for mortgages, follow the 10-year Treasuries. That's the bellwether benchmark for interest rates, for mortgage interest rates. Not the Fed rate or anything like that. That has nothing to do with mortgages. It's 10-year Treasuries. So if you see 10-year Treasuries over a solid month or two going up, you can just watch the interest rates slowly climbing up behind them. And if you see them going down, same thing. If you see them trading laterally, this is a cost of debt to the U.S. is putting out. And so they are the index for mortgage interest rates by the mortgage providers and the people that are lending money. And I think we're a little bit baffled. I mean, my friends say that they think interest rates are going to go up probably just a point within the next 12 months. But, now there was some stuff coming out on the news programs the other day saying that by the end of this year, we might actually see another slight dip in interest rates. So I don't know what's going on. This is a bizarre market, and it's long overdue for a correction. And I would plan on it, and I would get ready for it because it's coming. It's just a matter of when. I mean, as the old saying goes, what goes up must come down, right?
Right. So what currently is the interest rate on 10-year federal bonds?
Darn near zero.
Oh yeah, and
less than a point. I haven't looked at the latest quoted numbers, but yeah, it's very cheap. Just like the Fed's lending rate is basically zero and has been believed to potentially go negative if they keep stimulating the economy, where banks can actually borrow money at less than 0%, which sounds bizarre, but financial institutions are making plenty of money right now. I mean, with the cost of money coming out of the Fed and treasuries, this is the way I look at treasuries, and this is the way I look at the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy, Lacey, issues lots of forms of debt. Okay, you got 10-year, 30-year treasuries, 5-year notes, 1-year notes. When we know we have a problem, here's the quickest way to summarize this. When we know we have a problem is when there's not buyers on the other side to buy those notes, and fund our operations and our overspending. When we don't have Europeans and Chinese and Middle Easterners and all the other billionaires and millionaires and people, institutions that are buying that paper around the world, and they are, and that's a good thing. I mean, if we don't have buyers on the other end, two things happen. We have a crisis, and we also have to up the interest rates and the return that we pay people, because it's a supply and demand market. So if the Fed issues treasury notes at 1/8 of a point, and that's all they're paying out, hey, great. As long as you got buyers all around the world that'll buy our treasuries at 1/8 of a point return, rate of return, we're in good shape, aren't we? But what happens if this doesn't happen and they say we're not buying for any number of reasons? We don't like whoever's in office. We don't like their economic policies. We don't like what the U.S. is doing elsewhere. We're not going to pay that. Well, then those rates go up. What happens when those interest rates that have to be paid out in order to get people to buy our bonds goes up? The entire federal debt that we pay and service and all of our expenditures go rampantly up. And we got a problem in this country, a huge economic problem.
Yeah. So while we're on the Feds and monetary policies and things like that, gas prices are going up. They tell us inflation is setting in. Is this a result of a lot of the currency they're putting into circulation, or
Absolutely?
And when do we see where do we see this going? I mean, do we see inflation going up even higher Well, I'm quite sure probably before it gets better. What is it going to take to bring down this inflation, in your opinion?
Well, and that's a good question. I don't know if it's just one thing or one answer. The
Hmm.
answer to your question though is yes. The amount of money being printed and circulated. I mean, let's just look at it. And you don't have to be an economics expert. If you put a lot of dollar bills in theory or U.S. dollar currency into the system, what is it doing? It's devaluing the
Currency.
cost, or it's devaluing the value of each of those bills, and we are
Hmm.
doing that at record rates right now, particularly
Hmm.
under the Biden administration.
Hmm.
And so we got to be careful with this. I mean, we've got a battle of ideologies here between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, and the economics both believe in is the Biden administration believes government needs to stimulate the economy and to stimulate growth. So that's why you see the printing press is turned on full bore, and this is going to have an impact on. It's going to have an impact, and some excuse my language, but it's going to have some hell to pay here in the coming months and years, because this stuff just doesn't solve itself, and we got to be careful with what we're doing with this. I think that's why in our federal using our Federal Reserve, which is kind of there are a lot of people that don't believe that our Federal Reserve either should be stimulating economic policy, which is really a culmination of all the banks and
Hmm.
bankers. We're going to have to do something with respect to interest rates and or money circulation, or the things that obviously everybody is kind of paying attention to and saying, well, somehow you're going to have to go back and fix this. And so, you can take money out of circulation, but you don't want to do that at this point in time right now.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so there's just a real difference of ideologies, and I'm a little worried when we have 30 to 40 key consumer uh, uh, measures of products and services that are right now getting hammered with inflation, oil and gas being one of them. This is kind of scary stuff. And the last time we've seen this was the Carter administration in the 70s, many of which your listeners may have not lived through that period. But you remember it, Lacey, like
Yes.
I do. You go to
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
gas station and you're waiting 2 hours to fill up your tank. You know,
Yes.
I mean, there
Well,
could be some.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to say
Yeah,
there.
I think part of the concern there too, uh, they're still spending, and they're still running up the debt, and they're still pumping more currency into the economy. And but you know, politicians figured out a long time ago most Americans either don't understand what's going on, or they're not. It's not a priority. So they will spend themselves and give people whatever they ask for to get reelected. That's just my opinion. And I'm concerned about my little grandson having to pay for this. Of course, we're not going to get into that now, but there's such thing as a modern monetary theory that says we don't have to worry about that. The government just print money and we don't ever have to pay it off. But that's a whole different subject. Uh, you mentioned corrections in the housing industry. We talked about the 2008 housing bubble. I'm assuming these corrections, and I think you implied in your answers, are not going to be that serious. It's just your normal 7-year correction somewhere down the road, where it's late right now. Uh, so, how do you see it impacting your industry when this correction comes? What effect it's going to have on you and your 100 real estate agents or whatever, whenever this correction comes?
Well, that's a great question. And I think we've kind of prognosticated about this. I mean, it's hard to tell if we see a market correction, which is really going to be gradual rather than
Excuse
abrupt.
me. Hmm.
Um, I think I think that there could be some good things that could come out of it. I mean, the big problem we have right now, which is kind of a premise of a lot of the conversational pieces we're talking about here, is supply and demand economics.
Right.
And in the housing market, the problem we have right now is we don't have enough supply to meet the demand. There's a generational thing, and this is kind of my theory and belief is we're in a real unique generational shift where we've got baby boomers and millennials, and combined that makes up just under 160 million Americans. Okay,
Hmm.
that's almost half of our U.S. population of what 340 million people.
Hmm.
The millennials and the baby boomers last year, their last year was 1964, right? So and then of course, when we go to millennials, that wasn't the next generation after. Millennials, I think, went from 84 to 96. Well, they were born between 1984 and 1996. In 2 years from now, Lacey, millennials will start turning 40 years old in 2022. I think it's 2022. So that's going to be interesting. When you think of 40 plus year, the 40 to 50-year-olds, that's when people are starting to find their stride in their careers and earnings. They're having families or have already started families. They're definitely buying homes, maybe buying up on homes to newer, bigger homes. So we're going to see this. This is going to start to happen with literally 75 million millennials in the United States, and then we have about 78 million baby boomers. Baby boomers being the older generation that the last year born was 1964. They're now looking, and I think this is a little bit of the political shift and dynamic we're seeing with housing movement, even out of Minnesota, is people are saying, you know what? I don't want to live in a northern state. I don't want to live in a state that I don't agree with the politics. I'm moving south. And I was always going to move south and retire in the south, where it's warm and I got palm trees and such. But now with COVID, people are starting to rethink, and even their jobs are willing to accommodate a shift in how they work. They don't have to be in Minnesota and work out of a back office, or maybe what's now transitioned into a back office job, not needing to rent office space and be in an office. So we're seeing a lot of stuff here that's happening that's going to really impact a lot of decisions of consumers on where they live, how much square feet they live in. Are they trading up or are they trading down? They used to say baby boomers, the older generations, are always downsizing. Interestingly, in real estate, we're not actually seeing that often. We're seeing people that are baby boomers going into retirement or semi-retirement, and they're actually building bigger houses or buying bigger houses. Now, maybe they're buying it because it's in a different market where their dollars go further. Minnesota is a very expensive, in my opinion, not maybe as much as New York or California, but this, having lived elsewhere, this is not the most affordable housing market in the United States. We're about 30% higher than my hometown of Indianapolis when it comes to housing. And I would say we're about 25 to 30% more expensive than Florida, which is a very popular destination right now for a lot of Minnesotans who are leaving Minnesota.
Right. So the answer may be obvious, but why would housing in the Twin Cities, let's say, be 30% higher than it is in Florida? I mean, is it the taxes? Is it the public policy? How do you explain that?
Well, it could be a combination of any and all those things. Some of the cost basis in housing or cost of living is rooted in history. So, Minneapolis, I find this interesting too, looking at this through my lens, not being from Minneapolis, St. Paul, is, when I moved up here 13 years ago, I may or may not have shared this with you before, Lacey, but there was 33 Fortune 500 companies headquartered in the Twin Cities 13 years ago when I got here in 08.
Yep.
Yeah. How many do you think we have today, 13 years later?
I'd say we're down to about anywhere between 10 and 15.
Yeah, it's about 15. And again, we didn't lose all those companies because they didn't like Minnesota or they thought everything was too expensive or regulatory. We lost some of them through natural attrition, like St. Jude Medical merged with Boston Scientific. Well, Boston Scientific didn't choose to headquarter here. They're already in Boston. So all the St. Jude Medical headquarters gets absorbed up into Boston Scientific, and you don't have a headquarters here anymore for a company like that. So we've seen that, but there is real implications happening in the Twin Cities right now with corporations. We're losing that corporate base. And I think part of, we talk about all the negative reasons that cost of living increases. There's also positive reasons why cost of living increases. For instance, when you had 33 companies headquartered here, you had a lot of high paying jobs and a lot of upper level management jobs. Well, so now you have a higher demand for housing, expensive housing, higher end housing, because people can afford it. Well, what does that do? That can drive up prices because you have more consumers with more dollars wanting to spend more than maybe they do in a city like Indianapolis or a city like Omaha, where you don't have near those jobs, and therefore that demand for that type of housing. So it can be positive and negative supply and demand issues. that drive up the cost of living. But I think the Minneapolis-St. Paul has had a higher cost of living for some time. And I do think some of the regulatory policies and things do affect that. There's no doubt. I mean, it does translate down to the costs of goods and the costs of living here, or existing here, running a business here, retiring here. It's very expensive. I don't know any financial planners that would advise anybody with wealth over $3 million in net worth to retire here in the state of Minnesota. It absolutely doesn't make financial sense to do that.
I agree with that. So, and we try to reach a national, perhaps even an international audience here, but I have to ask about the current building boom here, especially in downtown Minneapolis. And I'm assuming this occurred in other cities across the country. But how do you explain all these? I mean, every parking lot is being taken up by a new building, a new set of residencies and things like that. What's going on, Andy? Tell us folks who drive through downtown Minneapolis and look like these apartment buildings are popping up everywhere, these condos or whatever. What's going on there, Andy?
Well, there's always a perceived optimism when we see construction cranes and high rises going up. But here's my caveat to that, I would say. You have to understand, in development, real estate development, projects are planned 2, 3, 4 years ahead of when they actually start turning dirt and building up. I mean, a high rise downtown can take 12 to 18 months to construct, just to build out and build up. So you got to remember, some of these projects that you're seeing downtown were envisioned and planned and capitalized 3 to 4 or 5 years ago. Man, I would say more like 3 to 4 years ago.
Right.
Well, we were in a much different place 3 to 4 years ago, weren't we?
Yes.
The bankers probably had a lot different optimistic view of downtown Minneapolis. The developers certainly did. And even the market from a supply and demand standpoint, and the consumers, as far as, we've been building so many luxurious condos in downtown Minneapolis literally for about a decade or longer. But now we got a problem, because we live in the current times, and the last 12 to it's almost 18 months have been a really unprecedented time. And I can tell you from my agents and from the market statistics that we follow in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis has got some structural problems for supply and demand. And I worry about people who bought in the city of Minneapolis, particularly. I'd probably somewhat broaden that to St. Paul, but I don't know that St. Paul's in the same predicament as Minneapolis. I don't want to dance around the issues. We've had some real significant challenges to, public, not only public policy, but also to police protection and, defunding police and all these conversations. There are real implications when people, or particularly our elected officials, which is somewhat unprecedented, are advocating to basically remove, the police from a city the size of Minneapolis or from St. Paul, in part or in whole. And this really does something to the confidence level of consumers, both already there and people thinking about buying. It probably even does something to the insurance companies who are thinking about insuring in these areas. And so I think, we got to be really careful and hold these politicians in Minneapolis accountable, from the mayor down to the city council and all the way up to the governor. When you say things as you do that might be more of a personal agenda than a popular statement of society, there are real implications economically, politically, socially that come out of those comments. Right. And the repercussions can be felt for years ahead. And I do think that we're seeing a lack of demand significantly, which has dropped off the demand in Minneapolis for housing in downtown Minneapolis, South Minneapolis. I don't think this extends by any means throughout the Twin Cities, but as strong as the housing market is, everywhere else in the 11 county area, you get a listing, put it on the market at market price or even a little above, it's gone like that. These houses don't even stay on the market. But that's not the case in Minneapolis. That is not the case in Minneapolis.
Yeah. there's some subtleties to what you just said that I will pass up pursuing at this time, but maybe we can follow up later. We talk briefly about the housing shortage here and the current type plans of addressing that. And I confess openly, I normally am I did a little research on the housing crisis, and I normally am pretty good at just looking at an issue and coming up with some fundamental solutions to it. But though the housing shortage is a tough one. And to be honest with you, I had to struggle a little bit to come up with some different ideas that would help improve the situation. How do you assess the housing crisis here? And probably it's across the country, actually, but let's focus on locally here. And what do you see as some potential solutions to address the housing shortage?
Well, I think what we have to put as a context to the discussion of the housing crisis or shortage is we're really talking about affordable housing. And
Mhm.
affordable housing is kind of an entire cottage industry. I used to build tax credit apartments, which was Section 42 tax credit under the federal housing program, low income housing tax credit program. And that was basically an incentive through tax credits to developers to build that type of housing and then create affordable rents, which were indexed into HUD guidelines, for how many people are in your household, how many family member household it was. So I have a lot of familiarity with this. I'm familiar with CRA funds, which are Community Reinvestment Act monies. I don't know if you know this, Lacey, but a lot of banks are chartered and obligated under their federal or state charters to commit up to, the numbers I'd always heard was about 15% of their lending to meet CRA requirements for Community Reinvestment Act monies. So they could oftentimes finance a project in an urban area, and not only make a good loan in their eyes and make a good loan deal with the developer, but they could also achieve some of their CRA commitments to those funds every year. So we've had a lot of different things out there that are incentives. The truth is, and I saw a number, and I can't quote you on this, but I want to give you a rough number. In the 7-county area, the Twin Cities, we have an undersupply of affordable housing. And this might have been even as much as a couple of years ago. I'd seen the number. It was over 50,000 units of undersupply of affordable housing. And it's gotten worse. That gap has gotten worse. So whatever, it'll be interesting to see what those numbers are being projected by the city or the state, maybe more by the state, but that's a real problem. That's a problem for jobs. That's a problem for these employers who aren't paying everybody top wages. That's a problem for the people that work at McDonald's or work in the restaurant industry, as hard as it's been pounded through COVID, or that are employing people paying $10 to $15, $20 an hour. I mean, everybody's arguing we need to have a forced mandate minimum wage. Well, I would argue it's hard to live and take care of a family, even if you're making $20 an hour and pay the costs of rent or homeownership today in the Twin Cities. So we have a real problem that I haven't seen the leadership in this city or this state step up to meet the challenge with real ideas and solutions, and something that's going to really address this gap if it's that significant. And I know the mayor of Minneapolis, who's talked about in the city council of the Minneapolis 2040 project. Well, the problem with that is that's just taking land use and saying we've got a whole bunch of vacant lots, even in nice neighborhoods. We're going to incentivize a developer to go in and build a 4-unit project, and put affordable housing into there. Well, that's not probably the lot. Not only is it not going to have an impact like you want to have if you've got a 50 to 75,000 unit shortage, let's presume, of affordable housing in the 11-county area, but you're also going to socially disrupt some of these communities. Because if I own an $800,000 house, you ain't building a 4-unit affordable housing project in my backyard, or we're going to have some problems, right? And that has nothing to do with race. That has to do with you're not, the whole reason we have zoning is because we're trying to create uniformity to how things are zoned. When you do something stupid like that, you're basically saying zoning doesn't matter anymore. Wherever we got vacant land, let's just pick who we think should be where and what type of use it should be, and there's no thought to that, right?
Right.
So
So I know something that's near and dear to your heart is multiculturalism, and we're going to get into that just quickly. But a comment: I was at a community meeting, and they was talking about affordable housing, and each unit cost $500,000, and the total project was $100 million. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is just one project in one city, and they're calling it affordable housing. And I'm like, everybody else seemed to, I've never heard of anything like this, but everybody else in the room seemed to just accept that this is what it was and nothing was wrong with it. But I must admit to you, Andy, as a taxpayer, I was having some serious problem with $100 million development effort for affordable housing at $500,000 per unit. But I always want to have my guests back on, and we might delve into that the next time around. Let's pivot right now to your work with I think, Multicultural Agent Council. And I do know, and really, I indicated we had met out at events before, and I just know at every event that I saw you at, you talked about the Multicultural Chamber of Commerce. So why don't you tell me about what's going on with the Multicultural Agents Council and the Multicultural Chamber of Commerce, and where you're at there and where you want to go with this, Andy.
Well, yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Lacey, to talk about these two passions that are near and dear to my heart. And again, I started off early in your conversation saying that some of the inspiration for starting this and modeling, from scratch. I'm an entrepreneur by nature and experience. I wanted to create something within our market center that one could attract unique and talented agents from various multicultural communities here in the Twin Cities. We have a very diverse population, and I don't think a lot of here. Keep in mind, I've been here 13 years. I'm not even from Minnesota, and I probably know more things about the makeup of this community than a lot of native Minnesotans know. And I don't say that out of arrogance. I just say that, hey, you got to really dive into this. And, you've done some of this yourself, Lacey, running for offices. There's some really compelling things that are unique to our community that I think are great assets. And I think one of them, and one of the first and foremost things, is the multicultural communities that we have. We have over 100 multicultural communities from around the world, different countries, that are represented here in the Twin Cities. I didn't have that in Indianapolis, I can assure you. For the size of Minneapolis, St. Paul, we're not a Houston, a Chicago, an LA, or Miami, which are tier 1 cities as they're referred to. We're more of a tier 2 city. But we have the diversity of these tier 1 cities. New York City, Chicago, LA, Miami. We have the diversity of those types of cities. We just don't have the numbers. And so when I looked at this in Minnesota and I came here, not only did when I ran for office for Ramsey County Commissioner in 2010, I literally took this fact and what I came out of studying, and I said, well, if I'm going to get elected, I've got to connect with these communities, right? Regardless of my politics or what, whether I'm partisan or not, for which Ramsey County is a nonpartisan race. But I've got to connect with these communities. So that was really my first experience with multicultural here. Was I've got to go out to the voters, figure out who's multicultural in my voting district, and get to know these people, right? And that, just fast forwarding and not going into that chapter, I had a lot of success from that. I actually did very well in the election. I didn't win, but I did double what anybody else in those same districts did that year, including Tom Emmer when he ran for governor. So there must be some evidence of this or proof of this, that multicultural does matter, and we got to pay attention to these communities. So you fast forward into my current role, I kept thinking, how do we capture the opportunity of home ownership within all these diverse communities? And the first thing I had to do was study the communities at large, some of the biggest ones like the Hmong, the Somali, there's a number of these communities, the Russian community, the Polish community. I mean, there's different communities that make this up. I had to look at these communities and say, what percentage of these people are homeowners? Is there any data available to talk about this? How many of them are renting versus owning? And I share a little thing with you. There's a guy that you ought to have on your program sometime by the name of Dr. Bruce Cory, who's not very well known broadly, but Bruce is actually well known in certain circles. He's at Concordia University in St. Paul, and he left that role, probably had tenure originally, and Melvin Carter, the mayor of St. Paul, hired him to head up his Department of Economic Development when he first got elected mayor. So Bruce went over there and headed that up, and we had him in to come talk to our MAC, and I just think the world of this guy. But he did something that really fascinated me, and I bet hardly anybody knows about this. He got funding by the Wilder Foundation and a couple other sources back in 2013 to study the impact of multicultural communities on home ownership and rental housing here in the Metro Twin Cities. And it was a little known study, never made it on the mainstream, I don't think. I mean, but Dr. Bruce Cory did this study and got the money for it. And I read through it, and there is a lot of U.S. Census data in there, but he also went a little deeper dive. And I thought it was fascinating that the aggregate of all these communities, as estimated under a scientific approach to looking at this, it was estimated that the aggregate value of home ownership here in the Metro Twin Cities cultural communities, and mind you, in 2013, when the study was done 8 years ago, was about $20 billion. So if you took the aggregate value of all the homes owned, about $20 billion. Interesting, though, only 40% of the communities back then, the aggregate multicultural communities, were homeowners. Only 40%, 4 out of 10. Wow. So I looked at that and I said, well, wow. So that means that if we had everybody owning a home, which would never happen, that won't ever happen that way, but let's say it did, this would be a $50 billion impact on our economy. Would you think that might show up in all the politicians and the corporations and the people that live in the Metro Twin Cities, that we better be paying attention to home ownership and housing in the Metro Twin Cities just as it relates to multicultural? And nobody was. None of the real estate companies, Coldwell Banker, Edina, Remax, on and on down the road, Keller Williams, none of them were paying attention to this. I'd never seen, in the time I came into this role in March of 2017, I never heard anybody say anything at that time about multicultural. I never saw any studies. I never saw any initiatives. Nothing was being done. So I said, well, I traveled around the world. I know what it was like to be an American doing business overseas and how that felt and how different that was. How can I create something to encourage people to get into real estate as a career, and also to encourage home ownership through either those same individuals existing or drawing them into the business? How can we create more home ownership opportunities for individuals from these communities? Because that's only good for the massive economy of the Metro Twin Cities, 7 or 11 county area. And then the other thing that was in that study was he estimated, I think at the time, that the impact of rental housing payments back then was about $360 some million per year being paid out to landlords of various housing, right? And I mean, of course, some of this stuff has to have certain assumptions. There's no exact science to knowing the answers to this, but you can extrapolate and project certain numbers based on limited data that you collect and then making reasonable assumptions of that data. And so I thought that was fascinating. We have never had anything that I'm aware of done since that has been done. And so this is something through the Multicultural Agents Council we want to do, is partner with a university, provide the funding through various means, including Keller Williams. And we'd like to have this done every 2 years. Because if it's 20 billion, 30 billion, or 50 billion today, I think a lot of people would like to know, in politics and public policy, as well as and in government, as well as in the private sector, how big a market this actually is. Because this is a big, big market. And we're just talking, Lacey, multicultural. We're not talking about the whole market, the whole housing market. We're talking about just the multicultural communities. So we did something about this, and we've had success. I've recruited over 50 agents from communities of color in the last year and a half, 2 years from starting this. And we really haven't even gotten it fully where we want to have it, but we have proven that there is a need and a demand for this. And every time I've ever explained my vision of the multicultural chambers, Multicultural Agents Council that I've created and envisioned, every time I've sat with an agent that was going to go to Coldwell Banker or Remax or Edina or wherever they were going to go, they picked us because they had no connection with those companies on multicultural and couldn't find any connection. There was nothing happening. And so now I think, truth be told, fast forward, I think we have spurred, they paid attention. And I think we're seeing some more limited initiatives and focus into this area. But this is a lot more than just writing a check. Just put, I'm going to support this organization and give you $5,000 and tell them that I am, XYZ Realty and I want to support multicultural. No, this is something that's got to be more substantive. And we got to help people find this career path from these multicultural communities and the opportunities that opens up working with people from those communities, showing them how to get down payments through the state of Minnesota, which is money up to $15,000 for down payments. A lot of people don't even know they can get.
Right.
And connecting them with homeownership.
And it sounds like you're doing some great work there. I want to circle back with you and check on the status of what you're doing and the results of what you're doing. I'm going to respect your time and our audience time here, and I know you probably have to get off and do some evening chores and things. Is there any one thing that you want to leave our audience with relative to what you're doing in real estate? And then we will be following up with you later on in the year, and especially checking in on the multicultural activities that you're doing. But is there any one thing that you want to leave our audience with?
Great question, Lacey. I would say I think this would be a great thing to end on. We're hearing this acronym or this series of 3 words being talked about: diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We've created this whole new title in big companies. They have a DEI, senior vice president of DEI or DEI director or whatever, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. And a lot of this has been born out of, and we've seen the impact of this in recent years out of some of the strife that's been happening. And it looks and feels to me a lot like it's obligatory. Like companies have to backfill these types of roles in their company. And I couldn't disagree more in that sense. I think it's great that companies want to pay attention to more diversity and equity and inclusion. But here's the way we look at DEI. We don't think in my market center that this needs to be a requirement or a mandate. I like to think of multicultural as opportunity, Lacey. And when the National Association of Realtors is telling us out of Chicago, our national trade organization and lobbying group, that 6 out of 10 home buyers are going to come from communities of color in the next 10 years. I am a businessman first and foremost. I can think like a businessman. That's telling me that there's opportunity in this, not mandates or requirements needed.
Right.
And we got to change this conversation. And I was talking to some people recently about this, is when you tell somebody you've got to do something, or you've got to invest in this, or you've got to have a presence in DEI or all this stuff, you've lost them. We got enough regulations. We got enough things burdening American business owners, small and large, telling them what they have to do and how much more money they have to spend and be taxed and regulated. No, what you do is you convince people that multicultural is good. Multicultural is opportunity. Multicultural is the future. Because if you're not paying attention to demographics, just like I talked about millennials and baby boomers, and then you can go deeper into race. Races are relevant. They're going to be the future of this country. It won't be white people. I mean, I'm as white gets, and it won't be us. We won't be the sole largest segment of America. And so if you're a business owner not paying attention to this, and you're seeing this all in a negative light, you're missing the opportunity. Multicultural is nothing but opportunity if you can see it or learn it or get more focused on it. Take the time to look at that, because there are tremendous opportunities with multicultural, and we're experiencing them right now on a micro level. But I think there's huge opportunities for multicultural in this country, and we're even looking at opportunities to get into with respect to that national platform with the Multicultural Chamber of Commerce, and also with my company Keller Williams, and how we can do some things in other markets with like what we're doing here. And so that's my message is, let's stop talking about mandates and forcing people into DEI you will achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion if you see multicultural as an opportunity and start doing things to capitalize on multicultural opportunities. Would you agree with me on that, Lacey?
Oh yeah, I think. In fact, I was just getting ready to say this is a good point to end on, because I do agree with you. Based upon my 8th grade civics and love of freedom and the government not interfering in our lives, I agree with you. Based on a business owner, I don't want the government trying to tell me what to do with my business, and it's just good business, and I should have as a smart businessman, I don't need anyone making me do that. And so I
Amen.
really appreciate all the good knowledge that you shared. I support all the efforts you're doing in the multicultural area, and I look forward to seeing you very shortly again, Andy. Thanks very much,
Lacey,
Andy.
thank you. It's been a privilege. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. An honor.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.